Great to see such a wonderful audience and to be able to see you with the light. You can tell from the conversation here at the table that we're already well engrossed in the topic matter, which is a kind of play on the expression of who guards the guards, but in fact not only who watches the watchers, but who does it best, who best can watch the watchers. And that's obviously going to be a very exciting and a very stimulating and sometimes even quite sensitive conversation, I think. I'm your chair for the morning. I'm going to be learning an awful lot since this is not necessarily my own field of expertise, but I am Diane Whitehouse, both from the UK and from Canada, but from a small business consultancy. I'm joined at the table and at the panel by Stanley, who is from ACLU, and Jay is very nicely going to be our moderator for the morning and interact with the speakers, gain your questions, and generally keep us all on track, I think. Bryan Cunningham follows next. He's going to give us an introduction from what's happening in this area and in the various committees and agencies in the US. Bryan is a lawyer and with a law firm called Cunningham Levy. So welcome, Bryan, having come all the way from the US for this conference and panel. Our next speaker will be Emma Carr from Big Brother Watch in the UK. So Emma has come a little smaller distance, but the situation in the UK, I think, means that there's lots of news and lots of developments coming up, so lots to say. Then followed by Nils Leopold, who has come to us from Germany and is the senior advisor to the Green Chair of the German Bundestag committee with regard to National Security Agency. And I think Nils can tell us both much more about that situation and will do so. And last but not least, Nico van Eijk from the Institute for Information Law in the Netherlands. So you will see that we're tackling 4 issues this morning from 4 countries. And without further ado, I think it's now a good time to hand over to Jay and to Bryan as the first speakers. So Jay, do feel free to launch in.
Thank you very much, Diane. And we will, without further ado, go right to our panelists. Bryan, you're up first.
Thank you, Diane and Jay, and thanks to all of you for sticking around. I know it's Friday and there's some weather moving in, so hopefully it means a few of you are interested in what we're talking about. As you probably know, the United States government under our Constitution is divided into 3 supposedly co-equal branches. And I know that's a little bit simplistic, but I want to mention it because unlike a lot of parliamentary systems, I think there's 2 very important things to keep in mind about the US system. The first one is that the president, the chief executive of the country who is responsible for running intelligence operations, is not a member of the legislature. He's elected directly by the American people, and he is not selected at all by the members of our US Senate or our US House. And on top of that, it's often the case, historically in the modern era, it's more often the case that the parties that control either 1 or 2 chambers of our legislature, the Senate or the House, are not of the same political party as the president who's currently serving. That's true today, and it's been true through the majority of the post-World War II era. And so as you think about and I describe the institutional oversight mechanisms, keep in mind also that there are small p political and large p partisan incentives for the parties in Congress to oversee the president as well. without apologies if it's too simple, but as I said, we have three branches of government. We have an executive branch led by the president, now President Obama, of course, elected directly by the people. We have a Congress, which is comprised of the Senate and the House of Representatives, the Senate being elected 2 members from every state in the United States, directly elected by the people, and then the Congress is elected also directly by the people, Senate having a 6-year term and the House having a 2-year term. And then we have our judicial branch, as in most European countries, the court system, which is headed by our Supreme Court. And as I said, the president is responsible for the conduct of all intelligence and security and law enforcement activities in the United States. And our constitutional scholarship over the years has been quite consistent until probably the last 10 or 15 years that the president, as the Supreme Court once said, is the, quote, sole organ, close quote, of foreign policy. And that at the core of his power in foreign policy is the conduct of intelligence operations. So historically, our Congress has been seen as being preeminent in the field of domestic affairs, and the president preeminent in the field of foreign affairs. But the Congress always has the power to pass laws, which of course the president and the intelligence services are not allowed to break. If there's an issue of breaking those laws, then it goes into our court system. As you probably know, we have a criminal set of courts for prosecuting crimes, and we also have an intelligence set of courts for overseeing intelligence activities, and there's a lot of debate about how much they actually do that, but they are institutions that exist. In both the Senate and the House, there are intelligence oversight committees, and these committees have a number of quite substantial powers. The most important one is the power of the purse. So at any time, the Congress can vote to defund any operation at all. So let me say that again. When the Congress learned of the warrantless wiretapping program in the United States in 2002 or 2003, they could have voted that day to cut off every bit of funding for that program, and it would have been stopped. Now, there are lots of political reasons we can talk about later why that's a very difficult thing to do, but they do have that power. They also have the power, of course, to impeach the president if they believe that he has committed what we call high crimes and misdemeanors, which could include violations of the Constitution. They could vote him out of office. That also is very difficult to do. It's only been tried 3 times, I think, in United States history, and it's never been successful, although one president, maybe 2 presidents, I forget, resigned in the face of that. They also have a really, really important power, which is not, I don't think, well understood in Europe, and that is there's a clause in our Constitution called the Speech or Debate Clause, which says that any member of the Senate or House of Representatives can go on the floor of Congress and disclose anything they want, no matter what the classification level is, and they cannot be prosecuted for that. So we had 2 senators that were warning for a number of years that the 215, Section 215 of the Patriot Act, the bulk collection of phone records, was being misinterpreted by the administration, both Bush and Obama, and that American people would be shocked if they found out what those presidents were doing. Those 2 senators could have taken the exact same classified documents that were revealed by Edward Snowden and read them out loud on television on the floor of the United States Senate, and they could never have been prosecuted for that. So that's a very important power that's not often used. And then, of course, there's the direct oversight power. So the committees have the authority to call down as witnesses, either in secret session or in public session, virtually any U.S. intelligence or law enforcement official above a certain rank, and take testimony from them. We've had over the years some constitutional questions about how much authority Congress actually has to oversee those kind of operations, and we can talk about some examples of that. Presidents have actually even vetoed legislation, canceled legislation, refused to sign it and let it become law when they thought that the power of the president to control intelligence operations was being infringed on by the Congress. But by and large, Congress has to be notified for many, many kinds of intelligence activities, and most administrations historically have been pretty wide open with the Congress about informing them of things. And then the judiciary branch, the courts, can get involved in basically 2 ways. One is if a private citizen or a group like Jay's group, the ACLU, sues the government and says that they're violating constitutional rights of Americans, the courts can hear those cases and make decisions that are, if the Supreme Court of the United States upholds it, absolutely unreviewable. The president has no choice. He has to follow what the Supreme Court says. There are, as I think there are in the UK and elsewhere, issues about whether you can get in front of our courts, what we call standing issues. You have to basically be able to allege that you've been injured by something the government's doing. But once you get in the court system, our courts have a lot of authority and power to stop things. One exception to that is we have something called the State Secrets Doctrine, which is not as broad at all or powerful as the Official Secrets Act in the UK, but it does allow the government to withhold information in some types of litigation, although interestingly enough, not criminal litigation. So if you're being prosecuted by the US government, if they're trying to send you to jail, and there's classified information, intelligence operational information, for example, that you can show a judge you need to defend yourself, judges can't force the administration to disclose that, but they can dismiss the case against the defendant, and that's happened in a few cases. So I think I'll stop there. I'm probably pretty close to my 8 or 10 minutes, and we can talk a lot about the political and the party issues of oversight and some examples later if it's of interest.
All right, thank you very much, Bryan. Emma?
Thank you. So thanks so much for having me here today, and thank you to Bryan for helping to put this great panel together. So I very much enjoy coming to conferences within Europe. It's not something that Big Brother Watch we do a huge amount, but I always find it quite refreshing because I think when we're talking about these issues on a day-to-day basis, in our bubble somewhat, it can always feel like the UK is the worst place to be operating in when it comes to surveillance, and of course that's not the case. And talking to contemporaries at conferences like this, a lot of people say to me, oh no, we wish we had systems in place like you do in the UK. However, we do look to the UK as being kind of the gold standard, and if you guys aren't kind of reaching the highest levels of transparency and oversight that you possibly could do, then there isn't very much hope for us in terms of saying, well, look at the UK, look at the US, look at the systems that they have in place. Why do we not have those in our country? So I think the part that we play at Big Brother Watch is always having to try and get the executive branch to aspire to be the gold standard and set some pretty high international precedent for what oversight should look like when it comes to surveillance issues. Talking about that, so it's an interesting case going on in the United Kingdom at the moment. So some of you may have heard of a piece of legislation called the Draft Communications Data Bill, which was nicknamed the Snoopers Charter by its adversaries. And that was killed by the Deputy Prime Minister in 2013. We currently have a piece of legislation going through Parliament, pretty much in its latter stages, called the Counterterrorism and Security Bill. And the most important part for us in that was about IP address matching, so matching an IP address to an individual. But 4 members of the House of Lords have decided to take the entirety of the Communications Data Bill minus the safeguards and copy and paste them as amendments into the Counterterrorism and Security Bill, which are going to be reviewed in committee stage on Monday. Now, people seem to have gotten quite cross about this because, you know, when you've got an entire bill which has been looked at by a parliamentary committee, been shown to be not fit for parliamentary process, a lot of errors in there, a lot of questions about the validity of some of the proposals in there, and for it to be copied and pasted verbatim into amendments into an entirely different piece of legislation, I think is pretty bold. That's the word, bold. So it'll be interesting next week to see which members of the House of Lords vote for that, and if it does get to the Commons stage, which members of the House of Commons decide to turn up and comment and potentially vote on that, especially considering in summer of last year we had emergency legislation pushed through Parliament in 3 or 4 days as a result of the data retention directive being pulled in April, and that was a huge amount of controversy in the United Kingdom, and unfortunately that did get passed very quickly, but the debate was largely about we don't, from the parliamentarians saying we don't understand what this is, we don't understand what this means, we haven't had enough time to scrutinise this, no one's explained to us properly technically what this actually says, but we'll vote through because we're being told that it's important. So it's starting, I think, to cut very thin in terms of the public and public opinion of parliamentarians not understanding what any of this legislation actually means and will mean for them, but the process of feeling like they have the right to push incredibly intrusive and incredibly controversial, I think, powers through in this way. So that's kind of getting a little bit off my chest of what's going on in the United Kingdom this week. And then obviously that happens the day that I leave the country as well. So, you know, it's almost like a conspiracy. We have several levels of kind of parliamentary oversight in the United Kingdom. The first one that I'll talk about, and I do apologise if I oversimplify my comments, but we don't have a huge amount of time. The first one is the Intelligence and Security Committee. If anyone saw the latest James Bond film, the Intelligence and Security Committee featured in that, and unfortunately the head of committee does not look like Ralph Fiennes. As much as I would appear before them much more if they did, it has to be said. So their role is to examine the policy and administration and expenditure of the intelligence agencies. So what's the issue with this committee? Well, like the majority of my comments today, there's the question about the true independence of this committee. First of all, the membership of that committee is selected by the executive branch, and it's the executive branch who are the ones that are responsible for the authorization of warrants. So that's my first issue with them. The Secretary of State within the United Kingdom also has the power to veto what material the committee is able to see, and the business of that committee is determined by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is also the one who has the power to redact the reports before they're presented to Parliament as well. So is it a lost cause? There are, I think, areas that we could fix this committee and bring it to that gold standard of transparency that I was talking about earlier. So we think it should become a full parliamentary committee. The Parliament should be the ones that decide on who its membership is. And we think that if the membership have had previously working relationships with the intelligence agencies. At the moment, the vast majority of them were ministers, either in the Foreign Office or in the Home Office, so had quite a close working relationship with the intelligence agencies. We think that 2 parliaments should lapse before you are able to sit on the ISC. There's also a commissioner system, and I know we've got a representative from one of the commissioners here today, so I'm sure she'll keep me right if I say anything out of place. There's a number of surveillance commissioners in the United Kingdom who have a mix of active and retrospective oversight powers. Again, the issue with them is that their full independence has been questioned, not because they don't do a good job, that they don't do an arguably thorough job, but because, again, they're selected by the executive branch. The executive branch have the power to look at those reports, redact those reports before they're presented to Parliament. There's also been a question about whether a single Inspector General model would actually be better, again, bringing us to that higher level of transparency and oversight. And there's questions, and I think the most important question about the resources that are allocated both to the ISC and to the commissioners. The Home Affairs Select Committee did a great report where they compared the US system of oversight to the UK in terms of the financial resources that are given to them, but the physical resources, so the number of people who are actually able to go into the intelligence agencies, inspect warrants, ask pressing questions, and get their answers. And I think for the vast majority of commissioners, they're part-time. They have a handful of members of staff, and which leads to only a small percentage of warrants being able to be checked. Now, I know that they themselves would happily accept far more resources, want to have a much higher level of inspection and authorization authorization powers. And I don't quite understand why it is that we still don't have that system where they're given the resources that I think they rightly deserve. And until that happens, every time that an annual review comes from them, the questions will still be there: is do you really feel that you can do a thorough job you could do if you had all the resources that were given to you? Finally, I'll talk about the court process that we have in the United Kingdom. So if you suspect that you've been placed under surveillance, you go to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. So this is a court which investigates and determines complaints of unlawful use of covert techniques by public authorities. And I think this is probably the system that has absolutely failed to provide an effective means of redress. There's very little really published about the IPT, but from what I could find, that between 2000 and 2012, there were around 1,500 complaints and 10 were upheld. The most famous one is a family in an area called Poole in the south of England had found out by accident that the entire family, young family, had been placed under surveillance by their local authority because one person accused them of living in the wrong school catchment area. And they only found out by accident that this had taken place. A council official on a completely unrelated matter had accidentally told or alluded to the fact that this had gone on. So they went to the IPT, and it was one of the most high-profile cases where this family won because the necessary and proportionate tests really hadn't been met, considering the level of intrusiveness. We've got two contemporary organisations. So the Liberty and Privacy International have recently concluded their cases in the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, arguing against mass surveillance within the United Kingdom. So as a result, those two cases emerging, Big Brother Watch along with Open Rights Group, English Pen, have going to Strasbourg. Our cases are all being heard together, and I very much hope that relatively soon we'll start arguing in Europe about whether we've been placed under mass surveillance in the United Kingdom, the legality behind that, and start kind of answering questions into the PRISM and Tempora programs as well. So I think I'll probably conclude there because I don't want to run over too much time, but obviously I'm very happy to answer any questions or expand on anything that I've said so far.
All right, thank you. Nils?
All right. Yeah, hello. It's great to be here in Europe to talk about our German system, because after Snowden revealed his files and we've understood that it's a worldwide surveillance system in place, we need to talk. And so we'll see that from a German perspective, it's we have many controllers, many guardians, but very little control in place. And the German parliament is at the moment trying to understand and trying to look into the Snowden files and look into the work of the German secret services and the German intelligence agencies to understand which part are the Germans playing in this international system. And we've come up with an inquiry committee, a special inquiry committee investigating only the Snowden files and possible German participation in the system. So you might think if the Germans won't succeed with this inquiring and understanding what's going on, maybe other countries will have a hard time, because the system that the Germans came up with after the war is quite a strong one. We have a very strong constitution with a strong Supreme Court, and our whole oversight system, parliamentary oversight system, is grounded in the German constitution. So these institutions that we have should have a lot of power and insight into what our agencies are doing. Unfortunately, when you go into details, it doesn't seem to work that well. So I'll just tell a story out of from our inquiry committee as it's going on. It's been going on for a couple of months now, and we'll probably have 3 more years to go in looking into the Snowden files and looking into the files of our own services, especially our foreign intelligence agency and our domestic intelligence agency. And so far, we've come up with a very interesting story. It's a project named Eijk. It's a typical code name by the Foreign Intelligence Agency, BND, our Foreign Intelligence Agency. And the inquiry committee found out that there was a project starting back in 2003, and it's a cooperation between the NSA and the German intelligence agency. And this cooperation was about tapping the glass fiber in Germany, on German grounds, and extracting the data and, of course, analyzing the data with search terms. And this cooperation, from a legal perspective, that's at least what the opposition parties argue, was not grounded in law. From the German law perspective, you will need a legal ground for any tapping of the glass fiber when it is actually German citizens are affected. And so you need this legal grounding. And for this action, there was no legal grounding at the time, because this glass fiber that they attacked in Frankfurt on German grounds was actually, it was people affected from Europe on this fiber. It was a European traffic, maybe from Belgium to Russia or to Prague. So you had international traffic, and the law says there has to be a connection to German, to a German traffic. It has to go from Germany to a foreign country and back, but it cannot be a purely international traffic. So, but still they had this project going on. They went on the fiber, glass fiber, and they didn't tell all the different institutions that we have in order to check on this. So we have a parliamentary control committee. The MEPs in this parliamentary intelligence control committee say they never heard of this project. And of course we have a special parliamentary, it's an expert committee actually on telecommunications surveillance, the G10 committee. And they were probably informed, but not about the real fact that a different kind of fiber optic cable was attacked than before. So they have to be informed in advance about projects like this taking place, but they were not informed about the fact that there was a cable attacked which is not, has not the legal grounding. And at the same time, the privacy commissioner, who also has to be informed, did not know at all about this project. So we have, there were also other institutions involved, like the Federal Bureau of IT Security, or the Federal Institution for IT Security. But we have reasons to believe that they never knew what they were looking into. They were informed about this project and tapping the fiber optic cable, but we have reasons to believe that they thought that the products, the software and the hardware they tested were maybe German products, but we do think those were NSA products, and so they might have tested without knowing what to look into. So there were a bunch of institutions involved, and the parliamentary system in Germany has a bunch of institutions really who are obliged to look after the intelligence agencies. But in this case, the whole oversight system, in my view, clearly failed. And we have proof that this whole system clearly failed. And so the Germans are really proud of their oversight system and the parliamentary oversight system, but now they have to really rethink what they're doing. And I think the most important thing will be to have the inquiry committee on the Snowden revelations, to have this inquiry committee coming up with intense results also about how to reform the oversight system. And it's actually part of the job of this committee to do so. And of course, we will one more time have to rethink whether the transparency of the oversight system has to be raised. So we have to know more about what the different institutions are actually looking into. They have to become more transparent as they are. And when we are talking about oversight, we also have to talk about the definitions of the competences of the intelligence agencies, and we need more narrow definitions of what they can look into, and the permissions for the instruments that they might use. So when they look into telecommunications, for instance, they're not allowed to do data retention. And we need to write down that this is so, and we have to look into those instruments that they are using and the potential threats to privacy. And we need actual audits, we need the resources to carry out the resources by the different committees that we have. But all of those oversight measures won't work when you have intelligence agencies who work in a kind of a spirit, like a crew spirit, away from society, with definite orders to stay operative, not cooperating with parliamentary committees. And we have reasons to believe that after 9/11, there was this spirit in our intelligence agencies, just as probably anywhere else. There was this spirit that they have to be operative about what they're doing. They should not bother too much about what parliaments are saying and what transparency would tell them to explain to the public. And as long as you have this situation in the agencies, it will be always very, very hard to have an effective oversight on agencies. So it's probably the most complicated thing to get privacy rules into the system of intelligence agencies. It's the biggest challenge, really, and we need to talk about it more.
Thank you. Nico?
Thank you. Let me start by, the Netherlands are the smallest country represented in this panel, so let me first give you some information about how big national security is in the Netherlands. In total, there are about 4,500 to 5,000 people employed by both the civil intelligence agency and the military intelligence agency, and they're supposed to work together on a lot of topics. The oversight is mainly regulated in a special act on national surveillance, national security, and this act is actually under revision, and the revision process was already started before we had the famous revelations, and will probably lead to a proposal sent to Parliament later this year. I expect that to happen in the second quarter, so then we will have a very lively debate also about oversight. The oversight model has actually three components. First of all, there is the Minister of the Interior or the Minister of Defense. Those are the two who are involved. I will restrict myself to the Minister of the Interior just for practical purposes. So the Minister of the Interior is the boss, but also is overseeing the operations of the intelligence agency. Of course, that's a very complicated and biased position, because on the one hand you're the boss, on the other hand you're supposed to be part of the oversight model. The law, which was put into place right after 9/11, gives actually exclusive authority to the minister. He is the only one who decides on what kind of surveillance is going to be put into place. And a lot of these powers can be delegated to the head of the National Security Agency. And a lot of powers have been delegated to the head. Another interesting element is that, let me give you a practical example. If a foreign intelligence agency would want to have access to data that originates from the Netherlands, then there are two ways to do that. First of all, there can be a formal request to the minister. A country gets in touch with the ministry and asks access to certain data. But there is also another thing, and that's if it concerns data that have already been gathered by the National Intelligence Agency, they are free to share that with other agencies. And you should then keep in mind that the Netherlands, in the north of the Netherlands, have this big satellite park where they do mass surveillance on wireless communication, because the Act allows for unlimited mass surveillance of satellite communication, with the exception of traffic that originates or terminates in the Netherlands. So with taking that exception into mind, you can imagine that huge amounts of data are being collected. And because they are already collected in the normal way of operations, these data can be shared without any limitation. This is, of course, one of the topics that will be discussed when we talk about the review of the law. The second level of oversight is an independent oversight committee. That's where the members are nominated by Parliament and then confirmed by the government. These three people are allowed to look into the legality of the operations of the intelligence agencies. They can only do so ex post, so only after the fact, and they normally conduct two types of investigations: generic investigations, for example, looking into the methods of the agency, and there might be very specific targeted investigations. General investigations are, for example, about does the agency take into account particular procedures to safeguard and to avoid use and abuse of information, for example, in the context of exchanging information with foreign agencies. Targeted investigations include one of the most recent investigations that was started just very recently is about the attack on the MH17 flight, where the question is, what did the Dutch intelligence agencies already know? How was the information flow from the Ukraine to the Dutch government? And should we have had earlier warnings? And should we have taken precautionary measurements much earlier? Actually, not last week, this week, 2 days ago, suddenly very interesting information came available through public resources. You have to know the government has said, we cannot tell you anything about how the Ukrainian government informed the Dutch government, because this was a secret meeting of high-level diplomats with the Ukrainian government, and we can't report on that. We can't even report on who was there. And now turns out that even the Ukrainian media were there, and we have now photos showing who are the people in the room. And we also now know that there was also a high-level Dutch representative, and we also know that there was a warning about an earlier attack on a plane that was executed at a very high level in the air. So the warning was, we know that these people have access to extremely high-level weapons that could take down planes. So that's one of the more recent investigations that is taking place. But again, it's only ex post, and it's only looking into the legality of the provisions in the law. So they can't say anything about whether it was effective, whether it was appropriate. That's up to the political oversight. There is a committee in Parliament called the Secret Committee. Of course, the committee is not secret. We know that there is this committee, but they are not allowed to say anything about what's communicated in the committee. The committee is being used by the minister to inform Parliament about secret operations going on, about national security issues. That's information that can be provided before things happen, but it's also often information that's provided after actions have been started. And Parliament can listen, but they have no powers to act. Also, this independent oversight committee has no remedies. They can report, but they can't take any measures. Nor can Parliament, at least not the committee, can take any particular measures. So all the authority is actually concentrated on the Minister of the Interior or the Minister of Defense. This Parliamentary Oversight Committee is composed of the chairman of the larger political parties. So it's not like it represents Parliament according to how big the parties are in Parliament. It's really each individual political party has one person, the chairperson of the political party, being a member of this committee. This committee is seen as an ordinary committee of Parliament, so they have no additional support. They have someone who takes the minutes, and that's about it. And a lot of questions have been raised about it because, well, the heads of political parties are the people that have enormous other tasks, enormous amounts of other obligations, and so do they have enough time to really study the stuff that they see in this committee? And actually the stuff they see in the committee is material that is given to them during the session of the committee and then is collected again at the end of the session. And all documents are marked. So even if they would try to make a copy with their cell phone, it would be retraceable. And actually they have to give their cell phones to the people of the National Security Agency who are also attending in the meeting. The fact that we have this complicated system was shown quite recently in a very blatant way. One of the Snowden revelations was about the fact that there was a stat that said that the NSA got hold of 1.8 million telephone metadata from the Netherlands. So there was a question in Parliament, did we provide that data? And the minister said, no, we did not provide that data. At the same time, there was a court case on national surveillance where an NGO wanted to have more information what was the actual policy in the Netherlands. And in that context, also that question was asked. And governments are not supposed to lie in court. So there, the government said, yes, it was us who provided the data, which meant that the minister had lied in Parliament. And lying in Parliament is a death sin. It normally means that you have to resign. However, after the minister originally said, no, we didn't give the data to the NSA, in the secret committee, he corrected that. But then the secret committee is secret. So what is said in the secret committee cannot be repeated again in Parliament. So although the heads of the political parties were supposed to know that the minister already corrected that, they could not say that publicly in Parliament. And then the story became really a kind of soap opera, because then it was leaked that some members of the secret committee really hadn't understood the answer of the minister, the correction in the committee, as saying, no, I was misled, or I had the wrong information. So that led to a really nice debate about, do we have a good system of checks and balances? And also next week there will be a parliamentary hearing where this question will be on the table, and there will be a push to find new solutions, to find a better system of checks and balances, because the system that we have is not, let's say, the most optimal solution. That's it.
All right, thank you very much. Let me ask, so we're going to turn to the audience pretty quickly, so prepare your questions, but let me start off with a couple questions. To what extent does the system in each of the countries that you're addressing have good provisions for the encouragement and protection of whistleblowers? It seems as though one of the primary checks and balances, potential checks and balances is out there, is the fact that embedded within all of these secretive bureaucracies are citizens who believe in the ideals of each democracy and potentially at least can step forward and blow the whistle. But of course that is easier in theory than in practice. So if you could all address that quickly, it would be great.
Well, it depends on who you ask. President Obama and Edward Snowden would have very different answers to that question. There is in our law a protection for whistleblowers in the intelligence community if they report all the way up their chain of command in their agency and through their inspectors general. And that was actually an oversight, pun intended on my part earlier. I didn't mention the inspectors general. CIA and the other intelligence agencies have inspectors general with quite large staffs who are quasi-answerable both to Congress and to the President. The Congress has a lot of independent authority over the inspectors general. So under our law, Snowden and people like Snowden would have been completely protected through that entire process of reporting to the inspectors general. And then if they exhaust that process and they don't think they got the results that they needed, they can go to the congressional oversight committees and report to the congressional oversight committees, and they don't face legal jeopardy for that, meaning they're not going to be sent to prison. Now, pretty likely you're going to lose your job, or if you don't get blatantly fired, you're going to be sort of discriminated against in the future in your job. So our system is far from perfect, and there's no protection for going public. So if the United States government was able to arrest Edward Snowden, he would be prosecuted for lots and lots of criminal charges for making public, for giving the documents that he gave to the journalists. And this actually gets to what I think is the most important question in this whole area that I don't have a good answer to, and I don't think anyone has come up with one so far, is what happens when you have a system with democratic elections, with, I think our system and some of the systems that have been talked about have a lot of checks and balances. So we have 3 independent branches of government. We have 2 political parties that are constantly trying to score points against each other with a lot of incentive to fight. And yet, all of those institutions approved massive warrantless wiretapping and what most people will call torture. So how do you deal with the breakdown of that process, and how do you enable somebody like an Edward Snowden who feels like, I mean, I don't know all the facts of that case, and like I said, his opinion and Obama's would be different, but someone who feels like they have exhausted all their other methods. Because on the one hand, you have to have some avenue to bring to light activities that are approved by all the democratic institutions but are still inconsistent with the values of the country. On the other hand, in my opinion, you can't have a government with 100,000 or 1 million employees where each and every employee can just publicly disclose anything they disagree with and in effect overrule the decisions of the President and the Senate and the House and the courts, all of whom are accountable to the American people. So that's a fundamental problem in our system, and I suspect in some of the other systems too.
Thank you. I mean, I think we've got a very similar system to what Bryan's just outlined. But for me, I think what we need to start establishing within the United Kingdom is not only a means for whistleblowers, whether you're talking about a nurse in the NHS or an intelligence agent in GCHQ, but we need to start developing a system and a culture which means whistleblowing isn't actually necessary. I mean, in terms of what happened with Snowden, I think, like him or not, it was absolutely inevitable that a Snowden was going to happen because of the debate that was taking place, the lack of transparency that was currently taking place within the United Kingdom. We were going through a process at that time of the intelligence agencies and politicians arguing that increasing surveillance powers were required because of a capability gap. Obviously, the Snowden revelations have shown that actually the powers or the means of accessing information was certainly not being explained to the public. A lot of politicians certainly didn't know what was going on. So it's about developing a system which allows for far more transparency, far more public debate, obviously having the legal channels there to protect whistleblowers, but I think we'll see far less Snowdens in the future if we start kind of tightening up the screws in the oversight and authorization and redress procedures, I say not just for security and intelligence, but for all means of the public services.
Emma, there's a lot of debate in the UK about the Snowden revelations and all of the things that he revealed. Is there a debate about the adequacy of oversight, and if so, what are the proposals that people are talking about for reform?
Yeah, I mean, there is a bit, obviously, in the world that I operate in, it's talked about a lot more than I think the average person on the street. I think if you asked the vast majority of people what the oversight mechanisms are, they wouldn't be able to tell you. They wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you that the commissioners exist, that the ISC exists. They wouldn't tell you whose responsibility it is to keep an eye on the guys who are watching us. So I think, obviously, in the light of what happened in the United Kingdom with the murder of Lee Rigby in Woolwich and what's happened recently in Paris, there's much more public dialogue, certainly within the media, about how the system works. But prior to these incidents, I think there was very little actually being told to the public. And I outlined a little bit in what I was saying earlier. It's not about saying that the mechanisms that we have at the moment shouldn't be there. It's about tightening up who they are responsible to. Should they be responsible to the executive branch, or should they be responsible to Parliament? Should the Prime Minister have the power to redact reports written by QCs who are supposed to be responsible for oversight before Parliament and the public see that? I think it's that level of transparency and oversight that I think when it's explained to the public, they probably go, oh, that doesn't really seem very, very fair. We should be able to see whatever the recommendations are that has been put to the Prime Minister in full.
Yeah, German intelligence officer is supposed to go to his boss and report possible illegal action or breaches of the law. And of course, that's the only thing he can do. He's a public officer, and so he goes up the chain and reports and leaves it to the hierarchy to solve the problem. There is one regulation, though, in the law for the foreign intelligence service, and it states that you can address an issue to this secret intelligence committee of the Bundestag, of the German Parliament. But when you do so, it will also at the same time be reported to the president of the intelligence service. So you will have to face possible reactions by your bosses in the hierarchy chain.
Have you had whistleblowers?
No, we haven't had any whistleblowers that I know of that really, for the BND, for instance, have come out with information. And I think because the political discourse on security issues is so focused on just coming up with more repression and more permissions to tap and to surveil, it's always this one direction. I think the hope that this system becomes more transparent is really, at the time being, is not really realistic. So the question of the whistleblower is even more important. So the opposition parties in Germany have pushed for a whistleblowing regulation for the last decade. And there are many proposals out there. And we think it's very important to, on the one side, accept the hierarchy, but there must be a direct exit out of the hierarchy when it's a really dangerous situation, and when you have a huge scandal going on, there must be a possibility to leave the food chain and just talk to the public about it and address it publicly. And we try to put that down in our draft law, a whistleblowing regulation for all public service, which would also be relevant for the intelligence agencies. But the conservative parties, the large parties, don't want that.
Years before Snowden, we had a Dutch whistleblower within the National Security Agency. He never became public, or she never became known, but the whistleblower was leaking information to one of our national newspapers about inconsistencies within the national security agencies. The information was to some extent linked to national security, but it was not revealing, let's say, riskful information. what happened next was that the minister ordered the National Security Agency to tap the telephone lines from the journalists who were reporting on that. That case finally went to Strasbourg, and the Dutch were, and it was said that this was not possible because there was no form of independent judicial oversight. So this was not like a normal tap where you need a court order in case of national security. It's just a minister who can order court orders. This is now going to be repaired, but at the most minimal way. So there will be an exception for journalists when journalists are tapped in the course of national security issues. That needs an explicit court order. But as you can imagine, the definition of who is a journalist is a very fluid one. So it's only a very limited remedy, and again, in the Dutch system, there is no form of judicial oversight when it comes to national security. It's nowhere in the system as such. Theoretically, courts can look into matters, but then only based on very generic norms. The general experience with whistleblowers is, if you're a whistleblower and you go public, like was said before, you can forget your career and you're the first one they start prosecuting. We had this very famous case that where government officials were bribed by construction companies, and this guy was the one who provided the bribes and took the people to these brothels and did the famous golf things in Spain and whatever. And he had this ledger showing hundreds of thousands of euros going to civil servants about huge construction projects. And so the ledger was used by the competition authority to show that there was collusion. But the first thing that was started was a criminal investigation into the guy himself, because he was actually involved in the bribes. And at the end of the story, most of the construction companies settled, and the guy ended up in a caravan, and a caravan is not similar to a trailer home. It's really a small little caravan with his wife without any form of income. And then some members of parliament found that to be so unreal that a form of compensation was given, but it was more on a voluntary basis than on a, let's say, based on a rule thing. Oh, okay. They're thinking of changing that, but as far as we know, there is no example of a whistleblower that ended with a more happier life than, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Thank you. We're going to open it up now to the floor. So give me your questions right here in the black on the aisle. Why don't we start with a couple of them?
Here comes Katerina.
How many questions do we have? Everybody who has a question, just so we can know how to pace this here. Well, I see 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
That should be right. Okay, thank you. Andrew Adams, Meiji University in Tokyo. I want to follow up a little bit on what one of the things Emma was saying, and tie it together with two issues. How do you deal with the dual issue that's going on, which is one of the major things I think see that's going on, which is you have the shock doctrine approach that things like the Woolgar murder and the Charlie Hebdo incident in Paris are being used by the politicians to claim we need more access, we need more rights, we need to take away people's rights using encrypted end-to-end communication, etc. It's a standard shock doctrine approach. You take something which often, actually, when you look at it, has nothing whatsoever to do with the thing they're using it to justify. There's no evidence that in the Charlie Hebdo case that there was a failure of intelligence there that could have been fixed by lack of end-to-end encryption. How do you put that together with the claim that if you know what they can do, it undermines their ability to do it? And I think that this is a very powerful tool that the politicians use. At the one side, they say you can't know what the intelligence services can do in detail because that means the bad guys will know and they can get around it. And then the other side, they use these shock doctrine tactics to say we need the powers to do whatever we think we need. How do you counter that as a civil society promoting freedom of expression and privacy?
Comments?
It's incredibly difficult and it's incredibly frustrating, especially the thing that upset me the most about this is what happened with Lee Rigby and what happened with Charlie Hebdo is that people were still dead on the ground and politicians were taking to the airwaves to say, if we'd had the Snoopers Charter, then this would never have happened. So you don't know the full facts, it's disrespectful, you know, it's nothing more could be seen as being opportunistic as when somebody's still dead on the ground and you haven't got the full facts and calling for more powers. And I think actually that doesn't resonate very well with the general public. They see that. What's increasingly becoming true and is resonating with the general public is that we are learning about the lack of resources that our intelligence agencies, as well as the oversight mechanisms, actually have. It's like we've learned with Lee Rigby and with Charlie Hebdo that the perpetrators were very much known to the security services. They were being watched for a quite a long period of time. Incredibly intrusive surveillance was taking place, quite rightly. And because they were reduced down to a low risk and there was a lack of resources, they were stopped being watched altogether. They fell off the radar and these awful things happened. And so actually, there was £1.8 billion put to one side for the draft communications data bill. Our argument was, why don't we put that into the resources, not only for the intelligence agencies, but for the oversight mechanisms, and actually see how well these powers that we have at the moment could be used if we were resourcing them properly. And I think for the public, that's the question that's been asked a lot since Charlie Hebdo. And that's intensified, in fact, I think, by politicians looking incredibly stupid and misinformed when they start talking about wanting to get rid of things like WhatsApp and Snapchat, wanting to get rid of encryption, whilst also talking about, in the case of Prime Minister Cameron going to see President Obama and saying, oh, I think we need to really tighten up cybersecurity. I think it's imperative that we start doing war games to ensure that our critical national infrastructure in both the UK and the US, and especially in the financial sector, is really up to scratch because we don't want any cyber attacks. Well, then don't get rid of encryption, because that's a really stupid thing to do. I'm sure anybody in the financial sector will tell you, get rid of encryption, then that's online banking gone, and we'll probably leave London, and we'll not be very happy about it, and our clients won't be very happy about it, and the public won't be very happy about it. So there's very simple things, actually, but it just, in terms of winning over the public, in terms of the rhetoric and counteracting the, you know, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, we know what's going on, it's all up to muster, just trust us. By explaining to them, A, how the internet works, B, how you keep it safe, and just the simple and trying to keep level-headed in your counter-arguments. And I think nothing beats saying, you know, being the one sat there from civil society saying, why don't we start resourcing the intelligence agencies more? Because actually no politician can argue against you when you're making that argument.
We get our next question, please.
Jens Jeppersen with the Center for Democracy and Technology. We've been active in these debates both in the US, Europe and the UK. I actually have a colleague with me who's been weighing in on some of the UK processes. Since the panel is titled in the way of a question, would any of you like to venture an answer in terms of, does any country have a model oversight mechanism, or do we have to construct one? A model system with components from different countries.
And I might add, I mean, the surveillance capabilities of modern intel agencies has expanded dramatically beyond anything that existed, you know, even a few decades ago because of new computer technology. Do we need radical new institutions that we haven't even thought of to scale up to match the oversight to the capabilities that these intelligence agencies now have? Any thoughts on that, or what was asked?
Well, I'll take a little bit of a shot at that, and just to sort of tie the last question together with this one. We had a chief of staff to an American president who once said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And it's just, as the sun rises in the morning, politicians are going to respond to the fear of their constituents. And right now, you know, it's sort of ironic, as the U.S. provision for bulk collection of telephone records is set to expire in June of 2015. In the Netherlands, they're introducing a bill to give the government that power. So you have to both recognize that phenomenon and also, I think, be aware that that's the moment at which you have to be the most vigilant. I think the USA Patriot Act was pushed through Congress in about 40 days and passed the U.S. Senate 98-2 or 99-1 or something. To get to this question, I actually, as you could probably tell, I feel like institutionally, the United States system for oversight is set up about as robustly as it could be. You have 3 different branches of government. You have multiple mechanisms inside those branches of government. You have political and in many cases partisan incentives to challenge the president. You have a lot of institutional power and, unlike in some of the other countries, very significant staffs. I mean, the Senate and House Intelligence Committees combined, I don't know, probably easily have over 100 staff members. The 2 fundamental problems, I think, in the U.S. are, one, the intelligence services do tend to put forward to the members of Congress what they want to do in the best possible light. So part of what Senator Feinstein and the Democratic senator on the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Obama administration in the same party are actually fighting about right now with the torture report is the degree to which the CIA, yes, did brief them and did get their approval. Very few people are saying that didn't happen anymore. But the claim is that they didn't give them enough information and it wasn't accurate and they sort of shaded it to indicate the outcome. So I think one mechanism that would be helpful in our system would be a greater degree of participation by the members of Congress who aren't on the intelligence committees in some of those issues, because there is a tendency to get captured by to get just persuaded that your agencies you're overseeing are always telling the truth. And secondly, as I said before, I do think there needs to be some mechanism, I guess a little bit what it sounds like Nils was talking about in Germany, where a whistleblower could make some version of an allegation public without disclosing the details of a classified program. So, for example, Snowden could have publicly said, look, I am personally aware, I've seen documents that suggest there's massive collection going on in one of our systems of telecommunications without revealing 2 million pages of documents or whatever it was. Then all the media and organizations like Jay's put on notice of that could investigate it. Still not perfect. And Snowden's response to that would be, well, I had to have all those documents because no one would have believed me. So that's not a perfect solution, but I think that would be helpful. And to your question, Jay, I think absolutely. With the march of technology, both on the side of giving the government more power and also on the side of being able to enhance oversight, we should be able to do much better. There's no reason why the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in the United States could not, every month make a public transparency report with the number of warrants granted, et cetera.
We have 2 more questions on the. I know you all have many thoughts. Why don't we hear the 2 questions, and then everybody can address those 2 questions, and also get whatever thoughts they have on their mind out. We only have a couple more minutes. Yes.
Thank you. Charles Rabb, University of Edinburgh. I'll be quick. I thought Emma might have mentioned the independent reviewer of anti-terrorism legislation, but I'll let that one pass. What I wanted to ask is as follows. At the moment, there's a public consultation going on by the UK government until the end of this month, among other things, as to whether the UK should have something like a privacy and civil liberties oversight board, as you have in the USA. And I wanted to ask, this is maybe for Bryan, maybe Jay, maybe Emma, are there lessons to be learned about that? Would that be a good model to adopt in the UK system? And how far would it be able to function without having access to very closed official and secret documents?
And we had one other question. Go ahead and state that, and then we'll.
Mario Timer from the Fundamental Rights Agency. We're currently doing a project on precisely looking at all these questions in the 28 member states upon the request of the European Parliament. Now, I would have a question for Nils and Nico, because I think what you raised in your presentation is quite interesting from the point of view of a call for more transparency, and at the same time, Nico referring to that a very clear example of the information that a secret committee, as you called it, could actually access certain information. So how, Nils, would you, in your capacity in the NSA inquiry, actually promote more transparency, while not undermining, in fact, the access to very classified information? I mean, is it not more about delegation of power to this committee and a certain trust that needs to be built so that they can actually access a certain level of information? Thank you.
Thank you. So we have about 3 minutes left. So if we could just sort of quickly with collected thoughts on everything that's on the table.
Actually, the inquiry committee has pretty strong rights to access information, and we have a massive amount of data on the table now. But the government uses all its possibilities to blacken whole pages, and it's like hundreds of pages that are blackened. And the argument is always different. It's different arguments why they do it. So we do have a lot of access, but still this access is being limited, and we have to fight over, almost every single file. And actually, you can bring it to court, but we don't have the resources to do so. So this is actually the access is really important for the inquiry committee. And we will have to have another, maybe a court fight over it. It's not the only thing. It's also about coming out to the public and actually being able to tell about what we found out. And so far, I think we did a great job, and it's going to be amazing how much we will reveal within the next 2 years. So I think that's the strongest sword that we have, is the inquiry committee, a parliamentary inquiry committee which actually has minority rights for the oppositional parties. This seems to be a very crucial part in reform, I think, that parliamentary committees that oversee intelligence agencies really have minority rights for oppositional parties, because once government aligns with the majority in the parliament, it won't help to just have this committee. You will need the minority to be able to ask those questions that have to be raised. So this is a key issue, and I think you have to have a mix. You have to have an intelligent mix of independent oversight bodies and also a functioning parliamentary oversight, which issues minority rights to oppositional parties. And of course, one aspect will also be that you have a post-legal process at least. So the people that are really affected by surveillance measures, at least after it had happened, have the possibility to have courts look into this. So you have a multi-layered, like many dimensions of oversight established, and so you can at least kind of narrow in on a more effective oversight.
And I will just say, since I've written about the PCLOB, that it is a genuinely independent body. It has a lot of potential. It is tiny in terms of staff and budget, almost laughably tiny compared to the size of the agencies that it has to oversee with 30, 60,000 people. And it needs, we would ideally like to have it have even stronger powers to access information, although it already has quite broad powers to access information. And also we think that it should have the power to unilaterally declassify information that it may come across that has been illegitimately classified or what have you. Any quick last thoughts? We're pretty much out of time.
I'd rather the UK had a board of that nature than not have one, but I hope that when we're setting one up from scratch that we learn the lessons that you guys have learned in the US already.
Yeah, just one quick thing in case anyone doesn't know. The PCLOB is the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board created by Congress and members appointed by the President. And I agree with everything Jay said except for the unilateral declassification authority. But one other thing that's really important is they need to have not only more resources, but technical expertise in their staff, and so do our courts, so they can understand what they're being told.
And I think that's one of the things you now see in some countries where, first of all, best practices are looked into. We're doing a small research project also looking into best practices. That's also a good way to convince, to start convincing people about that alternatives do exist. And secondly, using more external expertise is something that is now starting to be recognized, at least by, for example, this independent oversight committee, which before was considered to be just legitimizing existing operations. And when they changed the members clearly said, we want to have more outside expertise that will help us understand what's actually happening. I hope that's going to work because they asked me to, and I'm looking forward to see all these high classified secret stuff. And maybe there is nothing there. We'll see.
So, thank you very much indeed. Great job, everybody, on timing. Great. Thank you to the audience members for your fascinating questions. And please join with me in thanking the panelists for their exceptional insight and overview into all these oversight questions. Many thanks indeed to all of you, and to Jay especially for his fantastic moderation. Great. Many thanks.